Hello, and welcome to another episode of Her Head in Films. I'm Caitlin, and I'm your host. On this podcast, I share my personal thoughts and feelings about the films that I watch. They tend to be art house and world cinema. What I think makes this podcast unique is that I weave together my life experiences with an in-depth discussion of the films that I love. I explore the impact that cinema has on me and why I connect so deeply to it. As I like to say, my head isn't in the clouds, my head is in films. For today's episode, I'm talking about Florian Henckel von Donnersmarck's 2006 film, The Lives of Others. It won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. I'm talking about this film because it's one that I saw after my father passed away in 2006, and it left a big impression on me, and it's a film that has sort of haunted me for 12 years now. And this episode is about grief. I talk about how I've struggled to deal with my father's death, but I also talk about how cinema has been a really important thing in my life, how it's helped me cope and it's helped me survive and go on living after so much loss that I have gone through. The film and this episode is also about the film itself and about some of its most important themes that include surveillance and how people react when they are living under a repressive government, the way the characters are in the lives of others. So I talk about a lot. I put a lot of heart and soul into this episode. I hope that you'll listen to it, and I hope that you'll find something valuable in it. Her Head in Films has a Patreon where you can financially support the podcast on a monthly basis and also access rewards and extras. You can find more information at patreon.com/herheadinfilms. That's patreon.com/herheadinfilms. At one level, you get a shout out on each episode. I'd like to give a shout out to my wonderful patrons Iris, Teal, JD, Vanessa, Spunden, Polina, Olivia, Carolyn, Jesse, Feminist Overlord, Michelle, and Lindsay. Thank you so much. This podcast is listener supported, and I want to keep it that way. So I thank all of you for being patrons. You make the podcast possible. If financial support is not an option for you, and I totally understand if it isn't, please consider reviewing the podcast on iTunes. It helps people discover Her Head in Films, which I'd really love because I love sharing my passion with those of you who listen. Consider telling your friends and followers about Her Head in Films, or you can just engage with me on social media. I'm on Facebook at Her Head in Films. I'm on Instagram at Her Head in Films. And all my social media is in the show notes of each episode. So engage with me on social media. I always enjoy that. Before I get into my full analysis of the lives of others, first I wanted to talk a bit about why I'm doing this episode, the reason behind it, because it's very personal. I'm recording this episode in May of 2018. And I wanted to talk about The Lives of Others because this is a film that I watched in 2006 after my father died. And he died in May of 2006. And it was a really difficult experience. It was painful. It was devastating. I urge you to listen to episode 61 of this podcast about Guillermo del Toro's film Pan's Labyrinth, because in that episode I go in depth about why I turned to cinema, and I talk about a movie theater that my mom and I went to after my father died. It was a discount theater, and it only cost about $1. Sometimes it was more. I think later on, like a few years later, it went up a little bit. And at that theater, we watched so many different movies, from Pan's Labyrinth to The Lives of Others to just different stuff. And In episode 61 on Pan's Labyrinth, I talk about what that theater meant to me, why it was important in my life, and I also have an interview with my mom where we talk about our experience of being there in the theater, watching the different films. We laugh a lot in that interview, and it was really fun to do. And I don't want to rehash all of that because I've already talked about it, but I do want to just reinforce in this episode how cinema was really crucial and essential to me after my father died. I was 16 years old when he passed away, and I was devastated, and it was something that really destroyed me. In episode 61, I also talked about my struggle with depression and anxiety and agoraphobia. Things got really dark and really bad for me after my father died. And even 12 years later, I still struggle with his death. It's not something that goes away. It's May right now, and I've been crying all day. I've really been struggling to get through the day because when May comes, I basically just want to be tranquilized. I cannot cope with the memories of his death, the memories of what happened to him, and it's been so hard to live without him. And this is the 12th anniversary, and I was 16 when he died, and so I'm very aware that there may come a day when I've lived longer without him than I lived with him. And my father was my best friend. He was a big support in my life, and he loved me unconditionally, and he gave me love and affection. And I haven't had that a lot in my life. I struggle to connect with people. I'm a very lonely person. I'm very on my own. I have my mom, and she's really my main support in life, and she helps me get through, and I don't know what I would have done without her. But grief takes a toll on you. Depression and anxiety take a toll on you. And I also talk about in episode 61 how I didn't have a lot of money, and I wasn't able to see a therapist until I was in college. And I did see a grief counselor, but by then it had been 6 years. So at the time when the trauma happened of his death, I had nobody. My family wasn't there. They basically abandoned me and my mom. Both my dad's family and my mom's family really were not there for us. They did not help us. We were really on our own going through something so traumatic and catastrophic. And May is just filled with so much for me. When he died, everything changed. Nothing could ever be the same again. It brought death into my life. It brought ugliness. I thought my family would be there for me. I thought people would care about me. You like to think if something bad happens to you, that people will care, that people will want to be there. And so I learned not to trust people. I learned that that's not going to happen. I learned sad things about the world. I had to confront these realities at an early age, that people are not going to be there for you. They're not going to support you. You don't have anyone to rely on but yourself. That's a sad thing to learn at the age of 16. I learned that I was on my own, really, and that I had to save myself. And that's what I've tried to do for the last 12 years, even as I've been drowning and struggling with mental illness and with isolation and loneliness and loss. I have tried to save myself through films and cinema. And the year after my father died, my grandmother died. So in 2006, my dad died. 2007, my grandmother died. 2009, my uncle died. So I wasn't even 20 years old. I was 19. And by that age, 3 people in my life had died. And it was even worse for my mom, because that was her husband, her mother, and her brother. So, several of her family is just wiped out within 3 years. Neither one of us have ever recovered from it. It has taken such a toll, and it's been so devastating on our bodies and our minds. And we've really turned to each other, and we're very close, but every person has to go through grief alone to some extent. Nobody else can be inside your mind. And so art was really what helped me. Writing helped me. Films helped me. Literature helped me. That was what I turned to help me cope and to survive. But it's not everything. I still struggle. It's not a cure. It doesn't take all the pain away. You can only do so much. And some people are resilient, and some people can get through it, and they can be fine, and they can be triumphant. And I'm not that kind of person. I'm still a mess. I'm still crying. And I mean, it's been 12 years, and I think some people would think, oh, you should move on. Oh, you should be over it, or you should let it go. And I think that's easy to say when it's not your father, when it's not a person that you loved more than anything in the world, someone who loved and supported you and meant everything to you. I guess it's pretty easy to say that when you're on the outside. But when it's your loved one, when it's someone who is beloved by you, it's very different. And it's easy to say that, but it's not easy to live it and to wake up with it every day. And so I have had to find a way to keep going. And so cinema has become that for me. It's been there for me through a lot of loss and a lot of pain and a lot of struggle. And that's what I've been trying to share on this podcast is that passion for it and that connection that I feel to it. And so when May came around this year, I thought the best way to deal with the anniversary of my father's death was to talk about films and was to talk about the movies that helped me after he died when I went to that theater. And I was really lucky, the films that theater showed, that even though it was a discount theater, they showed some foreign films and they showed some really good films at times. Whereas where I live now, it's all blockbusters. It's all superhero films. So it's very different where I live now. And that theater that I went to back in 2006, 12 years ago, is no longer a discount theater. It has transitioned into showing new releases. So it's very different than the way it was 12 years ago. So much has changed in the 12 years since I went to that movie theater. At that time, I was watching DVDs and watching things off television. Streaming wasn't really part of my life then. Social media and the internet was not part of my life back then in 2006, 2007. The world was very different. It's changed so much. And so that's what this episode is about. I love The Lives of Others. It's a film that I enjoy and that I think is a really good film. But it is always going to be inflected by the moment at which I saw it. That will always define that film for me. I can't really be objective about films. That's why I don't call myself a critic. I call myself more of like a guide, where I'm trying to guide you to different films. I'm not trying to be a critic. I'm not trying to be objective about films because that's not possible for me. Often a film is it's defined by the moment at which I watch it and what's going on in my life and what am I feeling. And so these films from 2006, 2007, those years after my father died, I have very intense memories of them. And at that time when I saw them, they had such an intense impact on me that it's hard to put into words. But it was so intense to watch these films, and when I go back and think about those memories, they're very powerful for me. And I think the main way that I want to try to deal with my grief right now is to talk about some of these movies. I talked about Pan's Labyrinth, and now I'm talking about The Lives of Others. And I don't always talk about more mainstream and well-known films on the podcast. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I like the more obscure stuff. But I want you to know that I like it. I like a lot of different films. And even though this podcast, I like to say it's about art house cinema, it's about what I would call world cinema, films from all around the world. While it is grounded in that, there are all kinds of films that I love and that I have affection for and love for. And sometimes they're more mainstream. I would call The Lives of Others and Pan's Labyrinth a bit more mainstream than what I usually talk about. But that's okay. I want to talk about everything on this podcast. But I do want you to know that this film in particular is very personal for me, and that I'm talking about it because of that personal connection and that connection to my father's death and to this theater from when I was a teenager, and being with my mom and us watching films and us finding comfort and solace and salvation in movies, me more so than her. If you go back and listen to episode 61 about Pan's Labyrinth, in the interview with my mom, for her it was, she said it was a comfort, but it was like an escape for her, to go and eat popcorn and watch a film. For me, it was a bit different. I think it was a bit more intense, and these films have continued to haunt me and to stay with me. And I would say perhaps my cinephilia kind of started there, not fully. I didn't know much about European or art house cinema at that time. But there was, I think, a seed planted there in those movie theaters after my father died. And I can still see myself sitting in that theater, in that dark room, and these films being projected on the screen. And I feel like we are losing that as we go more digital, and I don't know, it's hard because I could argue both sides of it. That I live in a rural area in the South, in a small town, where the only movie theater near me shows blockbusters. So I'm completely dependent on streaming. If I want to see art house cinema, if I want to see European cinema, or things from Africa or things from Asia, I'm going to have to stream it. I'm going to have to. But at the same time, I have such intense memories of movie theaters, and I wish I could have that again. If they were playing Krzysztof Kieślowski down the street at my local theater, I'd be there in a heartbeat. No matter what it cost, I'd find it. I'd find the money somehow if I could. And I would absolutely watch Krzysztof Kieślowski or Ingmar Bergman or Agnes Varda in an actual movie theater. I would absolutely do that and have that experience, because that experience did mean something to me. And there is a difference between seeing Pan's Labyrinth on a movie screen to seeing it on my laptop screen. There is a difference there. And the experience that is going to stay with me more is not when I rewatched it on my computer screen, but when I watched it in 2006, when I was grieving and when I was depressed and when I was scared, and I felt a sense of home and a sense of safety within that movie theater. It was almost like this little bright cocoon, right? And I got to see these films, and that experience meant so much to me, and I've never had it again. It's been a decade since I've had an experience like that, where I got to see a foreign film or an art house film or something like that in a movie theater. It is so rare for me. And I do worry that as streaming takes hold, and I fully admit to loving streaming. I'm not against it. I'm not criticizing it. I depend on it, right? I have to have it or I wouldn't be able to see these films. But I do wish there was something more being done to try to bring films like that into communities like where I live in the rural South. I'm sure there is an art house theater where I live, in the state where I live. I think I looked into it once, but it's very far away. It's miles and miles away, tens of miles away. It's not possible for me to go to that theater. So it's not like they don't exist, but it's just very rare. And I do feel like we're missing something. And I do get nostalgic about Blockbuster. And I do get nostalgic about DVDs. I recently was going through my closet. I went through a big move in 2015. I lost my house and I had to move. I moved to another state. I moved to two other states actually in the last 3 years. It's been really difficult. It's been really hard. I wasn't sure if I had grabbed my DVDs, and I found them. I was going through my closet in my apartment, and I found them. I wanted to hug them. Like, I wanted to cry when I found these DVDs. They were DVDs that I had collected throughout my teenage years, I would say. And I used to go to different places like Blockbuster or different DVD stores or movie stores. And I would buy these films. And I found The Lives of Others. I found Pan's Labyrinth. I found La Vie en Rose. I found The Hours. I just found all kinds of DVDs from my childhood and my teenage years, and it has sparked something in me that has gotten me more interested in DVDs again. I don't do Blu-ray. I have just sort of a basic laptop, so I wouldn't have any way of playing Blu-ray. But I love DVDs again, and I started... I want to try to do Netflix's DVD service. I'm trying it out. You get a 1 month free trial. So I'm trying it right now, and I already got 2 films in the mail. And it was so exciting to go to the mailbox and to know that I would have these DVDs in them. And something about it, I'm just going through this stage, I don't know how long it will last, where I'm getting more interested in the physical thing again, the DVD. And I've had streaming for so long. I've been using Hulu and Netflix and Filmstruck and Mubi, and I am serious about my film watching. I have a lot of services that I try to use when I can afford them. And so I'm serious about my films. But I didn't realize how much I missed the DVD, that there is a difference. It feels like more of a treat. It feels like more of an experience. I have these 2 DVDs on my bedside, and I can't wait to watch them. And I've been going through my other DVDs that I discovered in my closet, and many of these have extra features that you can't find. The Lives of Others DVD that I own, that I got over a decade ago, has all kinds of special features on it. And maybe you could find them on YouTube, I don't know, but there's a different experience. It has deleted scenes, it has director's commentary, it has interviews. So I loved that about DVDs. I remember I used to buy DVDs for the special features. I would see that the DVD had special features, and that was really important to me. And I remember that I would watch the different films with the director's commentary, because that always interested me, what directors had to say and what they thought. And I always loved getting behind the scenes featurettes and seeing what things were like on the set, and interviews with the actors. And I love stuff like that. Some people don't. Some people do not care. They don't care about special features. I personally do. I think it enriches your understanding of a film. Now, from what I've read, the DVDs that Netflix sends out do not have special features. Maybe some of them do, but most of them, it's just the film. And, that's okay. If I want a particular DVD that has special features, maybe I'll try to get it or save up. There are at least 3 that I really want to get as a physical DVD. Now, I'm not going to all of a sudden start buying DVDs again. I can't afford it. These things are not cheap. These can be $20 or more. But I really want The Passion of Joan of Arc. I want The Double Life of Veronique. And I want The Tree of Life. Criterion Collection is going to release a new version of The Tree of Life in August of 2018. It's going to feature 50 extra minutes that were not included in the original version of the film. So I got my eye on that, but it's really expensive. But those are the 3 that maybe in the coming months, if it's financially possible for myself, I would really like to have those DVDs and have something tangible and something physical. It means something to me to have that. I think maybe it's a product of having lost so much. When I went through that move in 2015, I had to leave most of my possessions behind. I would say 99% or 95% of my stuff, clothes and books and so many things that I had accumulated over 26 years of my life up to that point. and it was hard and it was painful. And so maybe these physical objects, they have more meaning for me and more power for me. And those DVDs that I found, those meant a lot to me. It's like a connection to my childhood. It's a connection to my life back then, because I remember buying these DVDs and I remember watching them, and I have a lot of memories of that, and they mean a lot to me. And so, films have just become so important to me in so many ways. And I really think that it started in that theater after my father died, that something was dead, something had been destroyed, obviously, but something was maybe taking its place. Something was starting to grow again in those ruins that were created by his death. The ruins of me, just the shambles of my life, that maybe like a little blade of grass was coming up through the concrete or through the completely desolate soil or whatever, and what had been destroyed, and something was growing again, and something was trying to live again. And maybe that was my way of trying to live again after he died, was to go to these films and to surrender to them and to lose myself in them and to connect with them, because I think that's what keeps us alive, is connection. And sometimes you can't find it in your everyday life. Sometimes you have to find it through art, and you find it through music, you find it through films, you find it through literature, that spark of connection. And that can really keep you alive. And I know that it has for me. But for May, I wanted to revisit these films, and I wanted to think about them again and talk about them and explore them, and I felt like that would be a healing and productive way of dealing with this grief, of dealing with the fact that it's 12 years and he's not here. And how do you live with that, and how do you cope with that? And I don't have any answers. In episode 61 about Pan's Labyrinth, I reach out to those of you who might be grieving, and I talk about things that helped me, like literature, but I also mention, if you have the means or if you have the opportunity to see a grief counselor, I would urge you to do that. I didn't have that available to me when I was in the depths of my grief, and I wish that for other people. It can help, even if you don't think it could. I would urge you to give it a shot if that's available to you. I would urge you to reach out to people. If you have people in your life that you trust, please do that. Find the things that make you feel alive and hold on to them, whether it's writing or dancing or whatever thing is your passion, or the many things that are your passion. Try to hold on to those and make that be the meaning of your life. I mentioned meditation, how meditation has helped me cope with anxiety and depression, because when you don't have a lot of money and when you don't have access to any kind of therapy or help, because you don't have money, because that's the way it is in the United States, we don't have universal health care. If you don't have money, a doctor's not going to see you. It's just that simple. A therapist is not going to see you for free. So there are not a lot of options for people who don't have health insurance or can't afford it. So I've had to find other resources and other ways to help me get through my depression and my anxiety. And meditation is something that's helped me. It's not a cure. It's not a substitute for real therapy and real help. But when you don't have a lot and you don't have many options, you make do with what you have. But something I'd also like to say, if any of you are grieving or struggling with grief, is that whatever you feel is okay. That there's not a time limit on grief. It doesn't just suddenly go away one day. Maybe it does for you, but for other people, that doesn't always happen. Please don't think that you have to be on some kind of timetable. Well, a year later or 2 years later, I should be feeling this or I should be feeling that. Now, if you feel like things are really bad for you and you're really struggling, and again, you have the means or you have the access, I would obviously urge you to see a counselor or see a therapist if it's getting really bad and you can't cope with it. That should be a choice for you if it's possible, but the mental health care system in this country is horrible. So many people are left out. So many people are excluded, and I'm one of them. And I'm a victim of it. I am suffering because of it. And millions of people are suffering because of it. They have depression, they have anxiety, and they can't get help. What are they supposed to do? I've just tried to find things that help me cope. But if you can do that, you should. But also don't think that your grief should just end one day, that it magically disappears. Sometimes it's ongoing, sometimes it's lifelong. There are no 5 stages. That's like a total myth. Grief is complicated at times. And whatever you feel is okay. If that means if that means you're happy and you're laughing, that's okay. You don't need to feel guilty about that. If you're crying all day, well, that's valid too. There is no right or wrong way to grieve. But I would urge you not to push your grief away. I would urge you not to pretend like it's not there, or to pretend like nothing happened and that you're fine. I don't think that's productive either. I'm not a grief expert or a grief counselor. I'm just speaking from my own personal experiences. But it's okay to grieve. In Western culture, in the United States especially, there's this idea that there's a time limit on it and then you're fine. Or you shouldn't be emotional, or you shouldn't be publicly crying about it, or you shouldn't be sad, or you shouldn't show your emotions. People don't know how to handle emotion, and whatever you feel is okay, and whatever you feel is valid. If that's anger, if that's sadness, if that's resentment, if that's whatever, it's okay, and it's valid. So, and I would urge any of you who have a person in their life who's grieving to just be supportive and just be there for that person. Don't impose time limits on them, and please don't say things like that person's in a better place or it all happens for a reason. I would ask you not to inject religion in it unless you know that that person is religious. Because when my father died, I live in the South. It's very Christian, it's very religious, and that's what people said to me. They said things like he's in a better place, or it all happens for a reason, or God doesn't give you more than you can't handle. And none of that was helpful to me. Like, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. I don't believe that stuff. I don't believe in heaven. And none of that helped me. I really don't want to be told that my dad had to die, or that it had some kind of reason, or that the pain I'm feeling is okay or something. Like, you may not think it's a bad thing to say, but there is something very tone deaf and hurtful about it. To act like somebody's death was meant to be. Like, I have a major problem with that. I would urge you not to say that to people. Nobody comforted me, really. Like, I had such a terrible experience after my father died. Like, the way certain family members acted and things people did, it's really unbelievable, and I still struggle with it. And please don't say that to people. Do not say that to people. It's very rude and hurtful. Just be there. What would have helped me is if somebody would have legitimately cared and said, I'm here for you. And don't say it if you don't mean it. If you say, call me at 3 a.m., you better mean that person can call you at 3 a.m. Legitimately reach out and be authentic about it, and be genuine and sincere about it, and say, whatever you need, I am here, and then follow through with it. Don't say that and then they call you crying and you don't have time for them, or they need a ride somewhere and you're too busy to give it to them. If you're going to reach out to someone, be real about it and say, I'm here for you. Whatever you feel is okay. I'm going to help you through this, and I'm going to support you and be kind to you. That's what people need to do. And unfortunately, that doesn't really happen. At least it didn't happen for me. I wish people had cared, and I wish they had shown that they cared. But that didn't happen for me, and so it is what it is. But I want to use this platform, this little platform I have, to try to encourage you to be better than the people that I had in my life, and to just just say you're there. Just say, I care about you and I'm here for you, and whatever you feel is okay, and I'm going to help you through this. That's all you can do. Don't try to impose meaning on it. Don't try to force people into something that they're not comfortable with. And as I said, if you're grieving, it's okay. It's okay to feel that pain. There's nothing wrong with you if you're sad or you're angry or you feel like you're a mess or you can't get it together. I'm 12 years down the road and I'm still struggling. And I do feel a lot of shame about that. I do feel like, 12 years, I should be in a much better place about this, but I'm not. I'm not. And that's the truth, and that's just the way it is, and there's not much I can do about it. I just try to keep surviving. I try to keep getting through it, and that's all any of us can do. And be kind to yourself. Forgive yourself. It's okay to be fragile. It's okay to struggle. It's okay if you can't cope. You've gone through something very traumatic and very painful, and just do your best. Do your best to just get through it. I don't know. I don't have some kind of life-altering advice or wisdom to share with you. It's just do the best that you can and try to be kind to yourself and forgive yourself for being human and for not being able to handle it if you can't. And that's all you can do. But cinema is one of the things that's helped me. It's given me a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose. This podcast has done that. Engaging with cinema and talking about films is really important to me, and it helps me. And cinema, I don't believe in healing. I don't believe that I will ever heal. I just don't believe in that. I don't even like to use the word healing. I just feel like there are certain wounds that do not ever heal and that cannot ever be repaired. And they're open, and sometimes they're festering, and they're very painful at times. And for me, my father's death is one of those open wounds, and I don't think I can heal from it. But I do try to find moments of peace or moments of relief. I try to remember that there is beauty in the world, and the only thing I would use the word healing in relation to is cinema and possibly literature too, because those are my twin passions. That's when I'm reading something and I really connect to it, like a Virginia Woolf book, or when I'm watching a film like Krzysztof Kieślowski's The Double Life of Veronique, or The Decalogue, which I have an episode about. I have an episode about Veronique too. When I'm engaging with the films that I really love and that really move me, I do feel a sense of healing. It's momentary. It's like while that film is showing, but I feel okay for a little bit when I'm watching that. And that's why cinema matters so much to me, and why these films just take on such a power within my life. And that's what I'm trying to talk about and explain and put into words through my podcast and through my writing. It's not easy, but it is something that I really feel is necessary to talk about how powerful these films can be, and how important they can be to our lives. So now I want to talk about The Lives of Others, this film that I saw at that discount theater that I've been talking about. And I don't know if I saw it in 2006 or 2007, because the reason the theater was so cheap was because they got films months and months after they came out. They did not get new releases, so that's why it was only $1 to get in. So I most likely saw it in 2006, but I don't know for sure. And I have a very intense experience of seeing this film for the first time, and I think it's why it's become such an important film in my life. I remember being in the theater. I dragged my mom along. She does not like foreign language films. It's not really her thing. And we were like the only people in that theater, except for maybe one other person or maybe a couple of other people. And this film made such an impression on me at that time. I was probably 17 years old, and I didn't know anything about the historical setting of this film, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So it was really an education for me. It was a lesson. But it was a film that I think still has resonance today, and I think it still has something to say, not just about Germany in the 1980s, East Germany in particular, but the world we live in now, where surveillance is very much a part of our lives. So I'm going to try to connect it to our modern lives a little bit, but I do want to share my personal thoughts and feelings about this film. And I don't know if I'll be objective in any possible way, but it's very interesting to revisit a film that you saw as a teenager. And when we are that age, I think when we're 16 and 17, things are very impressionable for us. They make an impact on us in a way that I don't think later on, when we get into our 20s and we get older, I don't know if things can still have that same power. I just find that my childhood, my teen years in particular, are so powerful for me that the things that I remember, like, I I've read books and not even remembered like what happened in those books months later. And yet I will remember a book that I read when I was 13 or 14, and I'll have such an intense memory of it. And I know most of you can relate to that, where you forget something that happened last week, but you can vividly remember something that happened when you were a teenager, or even younger possibly. But I find that my childhood and my teen years are incredibly powerful for me, and overwhelming at times, those memories. And just a scent can bring them back. Just smelling something from that time in my life, or hearing a song, or I'm a profoundly nostalgic person, and I think it's because of my father's death. When he died, I was 16, and so it's like that was the end of my youth, that was the end of my innocence, that was the end of everything. And I think everything around that time, even the before, even the after, is very intense for me. The things that happened before his death, but also some of the things that happened after his death, they have such a power and such an intensity for me. It's really hard for me to even talk about it or explain it. But if you have not seen The Lives of Others, I would obviously encourage you to see it. I think it's a great film. It did win an Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. I'm going to give spoilers, so I do want you to know that. But the backdrop of The Lives of Others is the division of Germany between East and West Germany. East Germany became known as the German Democratic Republic, and it existed from 1949 until 1990. It was part of the Eastern Bloc, and it was under the power of the Soviet Union. And it was a very repressive government, and it had a secret police force, which was called the Stasi. And the Stasi was very adept at turning everyday Germans into informants on one another. And that's something that is in the film. But people lived in a lot of fear because of this secret police, and because of this repressive government. So that is the backdrop. It's East Germany. It's the German Democratic Republic, the GDR. That's what it's called throughout the film. And that is obviously a profoundly complex history. And I'm sure if you're German listening to this podcast, you know all about it. People in the United States, I would not say that we are as educated about it. We certainly know about the Berlin Wall. I certainly know about it and have learned about it. But I don't know all the complexities of East Germany and the German Democratic Republic. So that's not what this episode is about. I can't give you some in-depth history lesson about it. I don't think you need to know everything about it to understand the lives of others and to enjoy the lives of others. Something significant about the film is its historical accuracy. That the director, and I didn't mention his name, Florian Henckel von Donnersmarck, he went to great efforts to make sure that this film was historically accurate, that things that you see in it are accurate. So the film, in a gist, I'm going to go into more depth, but if you're not totally familiar with it, it's about a playwright and his girlfriend and how they come under surveillance by a Stasi agent. But it's also about how gradually, over the course of the film, these people who are on opposite sides of the political divide, who are really enemies to each other, how one of them, the Stasi agent, actually starts to change. He obviously sees this playwright and these people as sort of enemies, as people who don't fit into his ideology and the government that he is working for and that ideology. And yet he starts to connect with them as he listens to their lives, because their apartment is bugged. And so that's what it's about at its most basic, is about what living in East Germany was like at that time, what a repressive government does to the people that have to live under that government, the pressures that it places on people. What would you do? How would you act? Would you become an informant? Would you work for the Stasi? How would you survive it? Of course, we can't know. But there are many people that had to live under this government, and it was very difficult for them. And people became targets of the Stasi, and those people can even go and read their records. The records are open to people. You can go and they can read the surveillance records of them. People were imprisoned. People were tortured. People were killed. This is real. This was terrible what happened to a lot of people under the German Democratic Republic. So this film is one of the first films to grapple with what happened in Germany, particularly in the 1980s. And even some of the people in the film, the different actors, some of them were victims of the Stasi. So this is an important film about what a repressive government can do to its citizens, what people do when they're in that crucible, and what happens to them, and do they turn against people, or do they resist, or you don't know what's going to happen. So it's such a powerful film about choices, and about the choices that people make, or the choices that they can't make, being trapped underneath this very powerful government and being watched a lot. And but it's also, I guess, about the possibility of change, that maybe someone who seems so ideological, who seems so set in their thinking, could they change? Could their minds be transformed in some way through a connection to other people? And a big part of this film is really the humanization of all the characters, which is a bit controversial. That the Stasi agent in particular gets humanized, and I'm not sure myself how I feel about it, but I do want to explore it and talk about it. So this film has a really exceptional cast. Our main character is really Georg Dreyman, and he's played by Sebastian Coe, who is a very gorgeous man that I've loved for years and years. But when I saw The Lives of Others, I fell in love with Sebastian. I think he's one of the most gorgeous men I've ever laid eyes on. But he plays Georg Dreyman, this playwright, and his girlfriend is Christa-Maria, played by Martina Gedeck, and she is a very famous German actress. She's considered one of the greatest German actresses, really. And they are a couple. She's an actress, he's a playwright. She is often in many of his plays. And a man is obsessed with Christa-Maria, and that man is Bruno Hempf. He's Minister of Culture, and he is really obsessed with her, and he wants to find information about Georg, about Dreyman. I'll probably say Dreyman throughout the film. he's obviously jealous of Dreyman, and he wants an operation set up to spy on Dreyman and Christa-Maria. And so the Stasi agents, they go into the apartment, they bug it, they put those bugs everywhere. They put them in the bathroom, they put them in the living room, the bedroom. There's not an inch of that apartment that is not bugged. And so he wants them under surveillance. And so that is what happens. That is the impetus for why they come under this surveillance. And the man who is chosen to listen in on these recordings and to spy on this couple is a man named Wiesla, and he's played by Ulrich Muhe. And Ulrich Muhe is an exceptional actor. Like, what stays with me about the film is Muhe. Like, that, when I left the theater after seeing this film, he was what stayed with me. That actor. Like, I was absolutely astonished by his performance and what he did in that role. And I could not get over it. And when I heard that he died, it was really hard for me. He actually died in 2007. And that was like heartbreaking for me when I heard that, because he just came off on that. Like, I can't explain it. It's like, we talk a lot about directors when we talk about cinema. Oh, do you like Ingmar Bergman? Do you like Andrei Tarkovsky? Do you like Agnes Varda? All kinds of different directors that we talk about. But sometimes I think when we get so obsessed with the auteur theory and putting it all on the director, I think we forget maybe why we really go to see a film, or the things that really move us about a film, and that is the actors. That is the performances that they're creating and what they're conveying through their faces and their bodies. And I listened to the director's commentary of the lives of others. So I listened to von Donnersmarck's audio commentary, and he has this really great part of it where he talks about how much he loves actors and how he's really in awe of what actors do. And for him personally, he thinks that acting is like the greatest art, that an actor doesn't have... the actor doesn't have a pen, the actor doesn't have paint, the actor doesn't have all these other things. They use their face and their bodies and their eyes, and all they have is themselves, is their bodies, and that is how they convey emotion and all of this. And I would tend to agree with von Donnersmarck that I think there is something incredibly powerful about acting, and that often when I go to a film and what I connect to is the actor. And yes, the director is part of that. The director gives them directions and things like that, and the script is important. But what an actor does is very special, I think, especially the great ones. And Ulrich Muhe was actually a really great theater actor. I think he's known primarily for his theater acting. And he himself was under Stasi surveillance. There were Stasi agents put into his theater group, and he didn't know which ones were Stasi and which ones weren't. And I think he himself went and read his own Stasi file after that government was dissolved, obviously, and Germany was reunified. He went and read his own record. So he himself was a victim of the Stasi. And there are actors throughout the film who were victims of the Stasi, or were tortured, or were sent to prison, and who went through really difficult things. And it was important, I think, to von Donnersmarck to include those people. So this film is set in the German Democratic Republic in East Germany in 1984. And von Donnersmarck says that it didn't really have much to do with George Orwell, because I had wondered that myself, if it was connected to that. But he said that in that particular year, Russia had a lot of power at that time, I guess, and that's why he chose 1984. for me, this film is really about the collision of these three lives, of Wisla, Dreyman, and Christa-Maria. It's about the three of them, how maybe in another time they could have been friends, or life could have been so different, but because of this particular time in East Germany in the 1980s, they are on such different ends of the spectrum where that's not possible, that they are so shaped by the historical moment they are living in under this repressive government. And Wiesler is the Stasi agent, and he is spying on them. And they're so different. He is incredibly cold and regimented. He's very alone. And then we have these two artists, Christa-Maria and Dreyman, who are very affectionate and passionate and romantic and sensitive and creative. They're so completely different from Wiesler. And I think that's what starts to seduce him as he's listening in onto their lives. That's the title of the film, The Lives of Others. That's what he's listening to, is their lives. And through listening in on their lives and their discussions and their lovemaking and whatever, that starts to change him. But the real thing that starts to change him is music. Dreyman has a friend, and another thing that I like about this film is the way that it shows the impact of the GDR and the Stasi on different people's lives. Dreyman's doing okay. Dreyman is sort of in some ways working with the government. I guess his plays sort of go along with the status quo. He's not trying to rock the boat in any way. Him and Christa-Maria are not like resistance fighters or anything. They're just trying to survive. They're trying to go along with things. But they have friends who are not like that. They have friends that want to fight back. And Dreyman has a friend named Yerska. And Yerska has been blacklisted. He's a theater director, and he's been blacklisted. And that's really painful for him. And he can't get work, and he can't do the thing that he's passionate about because he really refuses to go along with the government. And Yerska gives Dreyman this music, and it's called Sonata for a Good Man. And later on, Yerska will commit suicide, and Dreyman plays that piece of music, and it's composed. The person that composed the music for the film was Gabriel Yared, and he's like this really famous film composer, and he's really amazing. I love his work. And he composed this Sonata for a Good Man, and Dreyman plays it in his grief, really, over losing Yerska, and knowing that it is the GDR that destroyed him. And he plays that sonata on the piano, and Wiesler can hear it through his headphones. And it's this piece of music that is so moving and so beautiful that it changes Wiesler in some way. And von Donnersmarck talks about how that's really the seed of the film, is that he was inspired by the image of a man listening to music and being so moved by this music that he would change his ideology, that it would completely transform him. He was inspired by a story about Lenin and things like that. I don't want to go into the whole story. It's out there if you want to, I'm sure you can read about it somewhere. But the seed of the film and the way he wrote the script and everything was this idea of a piece of music changing someone. And so a really big part of this film, besides just the surveillance aspect of it, which is really a powerful part of it, is this idea that art it can change people, that art is a force that can transform, and that there is, through art, the possibility of connection, of breaking through to another person, like Wiesler, who seems impenetrable. Because Wiesler is he's unreal at times. He does interrogations of people. At the beginning of the film, we see him teaching a class on interrogation. This is someone who is profoundly involved in the ideology of the GDR. he believes in this government. He's working for this government. Of everyone who seems unchangeable, it would be Wiesler. Like, he does not come off that way. Like, he could be changed or he could be transformed. And so the film, I think, is trying to argue that maybe somebody like him could be changed. And the film, I think, tries to show Wiesler in a more human way. And that's been controversial. Should we see a Stasi agent in a humanized way? I think it's a question that comes up with Holocaust films when we see Nazi officers depicted, or the SS depicted, or the guards at the concentration camps and the death camps. Should they be humanized? Should they be shown that way when they committed unspeakable acts of horror, when they committed these atrocities? And that's a complicated question, but I will argue that the people who commit these acts are people, and they are human beings, and I don't necessarily know if it's wrong to show them as human beings. Now, the extent to which you're going to show them as human, I don't know. There are degrees of it, right? I mean, you can show a Nazi officer with his family and try to get a sense that this is a family man, that this is an actual person, but you can't erase the violence that they commit. You may not be able to explain that violence, but you obviously can't erase it. And so when we see these humanized portraits, I guess, we need to also counter them a little bit. And I think it's about showing the complexity, that yes, this person is human, and they can have moments of humanity, I guess you could say, but that doesn't necessarily outweigh or erase the horrific violence that they've done. You know, Wiesler is a character who has destroyed lives. He has interrogated people. He has put people in prison. He has done so much. He isn't automatically redeemed just because he helps Dreyman and Christa-Maria. And now that I'm talking about it, I wonder if the film tries to do that it shows him in a redeeming light, and now I'm not so sure how I feel about that. This just hit me as I was talking about it, the film shows some of his more odious and violent acts, the interrogations, but it seems to focus much more on his transformation and him changing. And I would question how believable that is. Like watching the film 12 years later, when I was 17 and I saw it, maybe I did believe that. Maybe I did believe that, somebody could read a book, or somebody could listen to a piece of music, and that could change them and transform them and make them better people. But a lot's happened in the 12 years since then. Donald Trump has been elected. Things have changed politically. I don't know if I believe that anymore. I don't know. And I wonder if the film is a bit naive in believing that, in positing that this is possible, that a man would hear Sonata for a Good Man, and that he would become a good man, that he would become a decent man. And the film, I don't know if the film tries to redeem him, but it does sort of shows Wiesler as like a sad character, that, he's sad. Look at him in his empty apartment, eating ketchup on rice, and sitting and watching TV by himself, and look at him hiring a prostitute because he has no one in his life who loves him. Look at him at the end, he gets demoted, and he's steaming open letters, and he's delivering the mail, and there is something about the representation of him that is very sad. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I do wonder if it almost tries to erase some of the damage and the violence that he did as a Stasi agent. Does it go too far? That's what I think you as a viewer would have to decide. I'm just giving my opinion. Does it go too far in humanizing him? I don't know. That's a hard question, and I'm grappling with it. It's not that I don't want to see these people as human, but sometimes I worry that in trying to humanize killers or bad people, that we really kind of forget about the violence that they've done and their victims. And Wiesler had a lot of victims, and yes, he helped Dreyman, but he hurt a lot of people when he was a Stasi agent, right? So I don't know. I'm sort of conflicted about it, but I do think that in the film there is this idea that somebody can be changed by music, that art can have a very powerful impact on a person. And I want to believe that. As somebody who loves cinema and loves literature, I want to believe that language and films and art can change the world, that it can make people more empathetic and more humane. And I think at times it can. I think it depends. But I don't think we can put all of our hope into it. That there are people who love classical music and still do horrible things. There are people that like art house cinema and do horrible things and treat people badly. Just because you like certain kinds of art doesn't make you a better person or a good person. The Nazis would be a perfect example, that these are people who loved literature and loved classical music, and then they went and committed terrible atrocities and genocide. So art may not be enough. It's hard for me to admit that as someone who believes in the power of art and the importance of art. But at 17, I believed that, but at 28, I don't know if I still do. I don't know if it rings true for me that Wiesler would listen to this song and that he would change. But it is a powerful moment in the film, and Ulrich Mühe obviously gives an amazing performance. And that's the thing about Mühe. It's like, damn, it's almost like he makes Wiesler too human. Like his acting is so brilliant that this does feel like a real character. This feels like a real person. And he does give him so much humanity and sympathy. And maybe I'm uncomfortable with that. And I didn't realize I was uncomfortable with it until now. That I don't know how I feel about sympathizing with someone who has destroyed so many lives. And I wonder if the film, I don't know if it's good that the film puts us in that position. I don't know. I'm conflicted about it. I don't know. What does it do to humanize these people? Like, where does it get us? I mean, I know we have to see them as human. We have to see their full complexity, but I think it should make us feel unsettled a bit. I think it should. Maybe that's the point. Maybe we should be uncomfortable with looking at a Stasi agent and seeing and sympathizing with him, or feeling pity or feeling bad for him. Maybe it's right to feel discomfort about that. But that's something I'm grappling with now that I'm talking about the film and exploring it. And sometimes this happens where I take my notes, I have my ideas, but then as I'm talking, other things start to percolate and start to surface. And Mühe just gives such a powerful performance. It's one of the greatest I've probably ever seen. And he makes that character very real and makes him very sympathetic at times. And I don't know how I feel about that, and I just don't know if I believe that a piece of music could change a person like that. Now I'd really like to talk about Christa-Maria and this character. She's played by Martina Gedeck, who, as I said before, is a famous German actress, especially in Germany, and she's considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest, actress of her generation. And I have so much sympathy for Christa-Maria. I think this film, for me, shows how different people respond to being in a repressive situation. That some people resist. Some people are like Dreyman's friend Paul. Dreyman has a birthday party and his different friends are there. And that's also, I think, one of the last times he sees Yerska. And later Yerska commits suicide, as I said. And I did want to correct myself. Yerska is not the one that gave Dreyman the music for Sonata for a Good Man. I misspoke with that. It was actually Christa-Maria that gave Dreyman that sheet music. So I did want to correct myself on that. But Dreyman has a friend, he's named Paul, and he's much more resistant to the regime and to the government. And he's upset with Dreyman that Dreyman is not more that Dreyman sort of goes along, and he doesn't really do anything. He doesn't stand up against them. And he's just much more vocal about it and fierce about it. So we have people like Paul who were fiercely against this repressive government. And then we have somebody like Yerska who is broken down by it, who is destroyed by it, and just has everything taken from him that he loves. He can't work, he's blacklisted, so he ends up committing suicide. We have people like Dreyman who sort of go along with it. I wouldn't say Dreyman is necessarily colluding with the government or anything like that, but he's not writing anything that would be suspicious or upsetting or anything like that. And then we have Christa-Maria, who is really broken down by living in the GDR, and she takes pills. She has pills that she takes. I would think maybe there's some kind of, maybe something similar to Xanax or something to help her nerves, to help her just get through. She loves acting. That is obviously the one thing that I think is keeping her going, along with being with Dreyman, that the two of them, their love for each other helps them survive the GDR and helps them get through all of that. But she's a really complicated character, I think, and she's someone who is dealing with a lot, and she's just not able to deal with all of it. And on top of that, she has this minister of culture, Bruno Hempf, who is obsessed with her, and he is the one that starts the surveillance on the apartment, and he starts this sexual relationship with her, and he picks her up in his car, and there is a particularly brutal scene in the car where he is touching her, and he obviously rapes her. I would call it rape. This is a woman who is not consenting to being with this man. She's in the back of his car. He's got his hands all over her. He's on top of her. He has immense power over her life and her career, whether she'll be able to act or whatever she'll be able to do. So he is very powerful, and she has no power at all. There's nothing she can do in this thing, in this situation. And so I would say that he is really raping her, and that he is exploiting her and abusing her. And she is really just an object, something for him to exploit and possess and violate. And this shows, I think, I don't know the statistics. I don't know if this was widespread for women in the GDR, but her particular story shows what I would think a good deal of women perhaps went through, where they were not just having to deal with this very repressive environment, but they were also having to deal with sexual violence, which is often the case for women. Dreyman and all of them, they don't have to worry about their bodies being violated, but Christa-Maria did. And Martina, in that scene in the car, it's one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever watched. The whole time when he's touching her and he's trying to kiss her, and it's like her body just goes limp. I mean, I can see why she's considered a really great actress, although I think this is the only film that I've seen her in. Her body, the way she plays Christa-Maria it's very visceral, and in that scene in particular, she just looks numb. She looks like she is just trying to survive this moment. It's like she's there, but she's not there. And there's this scene where afterwards she gets out of the car and she's walking back to the apartment that she shares with Dreyman. And in her walk, just the way she walks across the road, and it's dark, you can't really even see her face. But the way that she adjusts her clothes, trying to cover herself and, tuck her shirt in and just get herself presentable so that she can see Dreyman, and the way she walks across the street, it says everything of what's just happened to her. It screams of the violation that she has just endured. And the acting in this film is like on another level. I don't think it would be the same film without Muha playing Wiesler, and it would not be the same without Martina as Christa-Maria, because they both just bring something out about these characters, and they make them feel so real and raw, but all the actors are great. I think Sebastian Coe is really amazing, and he was actually a TV actor, and this was his first big starring role in a film. That's what von Donnersmarck said in the audio commentary. Sebastian was primarily known as like a big TV star, so all of them do an exceptional job. But there are just certain scenes of the film, whether it's Muha listening to the music and that one tear coming down his face, or Christa-Maria after being raped in the car and just walking across the street. It's like what these actors bring out is just extraordinary, and I think that's part of the power of the film and why it stays with you, are those performances and what they make you feel. And Dreyman sees her walking across the street because Wiesler has set it up so that Dreyman sees it, and he knows what's happening with Bruno Hempf and what's going on. And so that's like an added shame for her that this is something she was probably trying to keep secret. And instead, now he knows. And now she has to deal with him knowing. And this is just one of many ways that Wiesler insinuated himself into their lives and manipulated and interfered in it and really disrupted it in so many ways. But Christa-Maria she's like a tragic character in a lot of ways. And, Dreyman finds out what she's doing, and he asks her not to go out, not to meet with Hempf, and she leaves, and she actually meets Wiesler at a bar. And those of you who have seen the film remember this scene, and it's this very powerful scene of the two of them, for the first time, him interacting with one of these people that he's been spying on for all this time. And he tells her she's a great actress, that she's a great artist, and it's like he's trying to connect to her, he's trying to communicate something with her. And it's really one of the few scenes of the film that shows Wiesler talking to someone where he's not interrogating them. He's not trying to hurt them. You get the sense that perhaps he is pouring his heart out in some way and sharing what he really thinks of her. And she ends up going back home to Dreyman, and she refuses to see Hempf anymore. But of course that comes at a price. And that's the thing about this film, is that it really feels like the person who suffers the most in the whole film is Christa-Maria. That she becomes the one that takes on everything. Because Dreyman isn't interrogated. He doesn't go through what Christa-Maria goes through. She really becomes the target of all of the violence, the sexual violence that she has to go through. The violence of when Hempf gets really mad and has her arrested for the pills that she's buying. He has her arrested at the doctor where she gets her pills, and then she's taken in and interrogated. And of course this sets off a series of very tragic events where she reveals things about what Dreyman is doing. I'll talk about that in a minute. So she is the one that really takes all the suffering and the pain, which watching it now sort of bothered me. It felt like this woman was being tortured, and really so much suffering was being inflicted on her. And that kind of upset me watching it now. I was like, that kind of pisses me off that she's treated that way, that all these men are there and none of them really go through any of that, but she does. And it was almost like this excessive battering of her, and I'm uncomfortable with that. I will say that when I was younger, hell, even when I watched it last year, it didn't occur to me the way it does now. And yeah, it made me uncomfortable for sure. But after Yerska's death, Dreyman writes an essay where he talks about how the GDR does not keep statistics of people who commit suicide because they don't want people to know how bad it is in the GDR and that all these people are killing themselves. And that article, that essay, gets smuggled over to West Germany, and it gets published and disseminated. And he types the essay on a special typewriter that's also smuggled in, and it has red ink in it. And I didn't know this, but all the typewriters in the GDR were cataloged and registered. And so if they found something that was written with a particular typewriter, they could trace it back to this person's typewriter. So he had to have a special one where he could type up his essay about the suicide statistics in the GDR. And so that sets off a lot of events as well, because they want to know who wrote this essay, how did it get to West Germany, and of course this whole time Wiesler is protecting them. He knows full well that Dreyman has written the essay, but he is protecting them because he has, I would almost say he's fallen in love with them in a way. And I think what happens for him when it comes to Dreyman and Christa-Maria, I almost feel like he lives through them vicariously. That he's like this audio voyeur, and he's almost living through them in a way. Like there's such a huge contrast between his life and theirs, because he's alone. He has nobody. He hires a prostitute. He has a very empty life. His whole life is dedicated to being a Stasi agent. And I think this assignment of spying on them has perhaps shown him how empty that ideology is, how empty that political belief is. And he's sort of living vicariously through them, and he's protecting them, but it gets to a point where he's really protecting himself too. Because if it comes out that Dreyman has written the essay, well, then the higher-ups are going to go to Wiesler and they're going to say, why didn't you catch this when you were spying on them? So I wouldn't say it's all altruism. It's not all him trying to protect them. I think he's trying to protect himself too at times. Because if it comes out that Dreyman wrote that essay and he didn't catch it, then he'll get in trouble. But Christa-Maria inadvertently learns about it. She sees Dreyman putting the typewriter back in its secret hiding place. Dreyman did not want her, well, his friends did not want Christa-Maria to know what was happening because of her fragility, because she was so fragile. And they knew that if she was interrogated, she would give it up. And unfortunately, that's what ends up happening, is that Hempf gets upset with her for breaking off the relationship. He has her arrested for the pills, but really her arrest is to get information about Dreyman and about all that stuff. And she ends up breaking. And Wiesler is the one who interrogates her. So he's in there, and she realizes that it's him, that here is this man that she spoke to earlier in that scene at the bar, the man who was building her up, who was saying what a great artist she was. And then now here he is interrogating her. And he tells her, if you want to act again, if you want to keep, being an actress, you have to tell us. And she does eventually break, and she tells them where the typewriter is, but she can't live with herself for doing it. And this is like a fascinating part of the film, because again, it's about it's not asking what would you do, but it makes you think about what do people do when they're put under that kind of pressure, when they're living under a repressive government. And yeah, some people can be like Paul and try to fight the power and resist, but where does it really get you? What does it really accomplish? Is resistance futile? It's like, I'm not saying it's right, the people who became Stasi informants. I'm not saying it's right, the people who colluded with the government or colluded with the Stasi. But if I was under the same circumstances and I was scared for my family and I didn't know what I was going to do, and they threatened to hurt me or to put me in prison, I may well break. I may well inform on somebody. I may well do that. And so I guess I'm not quite as severe about it in judging people who did, because you just don't know what you would do. And it's easy to say, oh, I'd do this. Oh, I would do that. I would never give in under interrogation or torture. It's really easy to say that, but you don't know it for sure. And this also connects a bit to my previous episode, last week's episode about Pan's Labyrinth. That film took place in 1944 in Spain after the end of their civil war, their very violent and bloody civil war, when the fascists and Franco were in power. And that was from what I know, a very violent regime and a fascist regime. And people were living under the fear and the terror. People were living under the fear and terror of this government. And there were resistance fighters that were fighting against it, but this was still the state that was in power. And they had the full, the full resources of a state with armies and guns and all kinds of violence. And it's the same thing with the GDR in the 1980s. You're up against an entire state apparatus that is against you, that has so much more power than you, that can torture you, that can take away your livelihood, that can throw you in prison and make sure you're never seen again. And I will say this is a strength of the film, is that it doesn't judge those characters. I don't think we're supposed to judge Christa-Maria and say, oh my God, how terrible she is. She was in a difficult position, and she did what she had to do to try to get out of it. And I have a lot of sympathy for Christa-Maria. And in the end, all of them were cogs in the machine of the GDR. All of them. Even Wiesler, even Hempf, for God's sakes. All of them were cogs. They were cogs in that bureaucracy. They were cogs in that government run by the most petty, selfish, stupid people. And Dreyman has the best line at the end of the film. After so much has happened, Christa-Maria can't live with herself. She goes home, they release her. The Stasi agents go into the apartment. It's a very powerful scene. They open the safe space, the hiding place for the typewriter, and Dreyman sees it, and he knows that nobody else could know that hiding place except Christa-Maria. And the way he looks at her, the betrayal that is there, and she can't deal with it. She runs from it, and she runs out into the street, and she gets hit by a car, and she dies. Is it suicide? Is it an accident? Von Donnersmarck brings that up in his audio commentary. Could it be she just wasn't looking too well when she went into the street? Or could it be she purposely put her body in front of that truck? I don't know, but either way, it's more like murder than suicide. It is the GDR that killed her. It is the Stasi, it is this government apparatus that put her in the position where she had to betray the man she loved more than anything, because she could not survive any other way. It forced people into these positions. And yes, do you like to think that you'd be the one that's brave and heroic and stands up to the state? Absolutely, you like to think that you'd be that person. That you'd be Sophie Scholl in The White Rose, right? That doesn't mean you would be. And the vast majority of people were not. It was a scary time, I'm sure, just like World War II was a scary time. This is what this is the reality, that people are not always very brave and heroic at those moments. They're just trying to survive and save themselves. But at the end of the film, after that, after Christa-Maria has died, after the Berlin Wall has fallen, and a few years have passed, Dreyman meets Hempf at a showing of one of Dreyman's new plays, and he's talking to him in the lobby. I'm trying to find the quote. To think that people like you once ruled a country. That is like the best line in the entire film, I think. And it's something that came back to me as I was rewatching it. It had sort of a special resonance for me. So what resonated with me about that line and about this film when it comes to the representation of the bureaucrats and the people who were part of the government and part of the Stasi is that it brought up a lot of parallels with the election of Trump for me. And what struck me as I was watching it is just how stupid the people were who were in power, and how the people in power always do seem to be stupid. They just are petty and manipulative and idiotic. But now, with the election of Trump and what we're going through here, where it's constant lies, it's just so much more explicit, the stupidity, the greed, the lies. It's all out there. It's all out in the open. None of it's hidden. The people who have power and who have control over our lives are often so petty and small, just like Hempf, just like even Wiesler. These are people who, there's nothing smart or special or interesting or extraordinary about them. They're just sad, pathetic, petty people who want power. They just crave power, and they'll get it any way that they can, and they'll do whatever they want to people. And Christa-Maria is a victim of that. Yerska is a victim of that. All the people in the GDR were a victim of that. But I also feel like now in 2018, we are the victim of that here in the United States, with the people who are in power in our country, and not just on the federal level, but people who are in power on the state and the local level, the people who get elected, the people that the masses keep voting for, and it never seems to change. I mean, there's a few stories here and there about really great people winning and doing good things, but the vast majority, it is these stupid, petty people. And they always seem to be in power, and it's incredibly terrible. And obviously the theme of surveillance is very resonant now in our post-Edward Snowden world, right? And things that came out about the NSA and how they were spying on people, and hell, I'm sure it's still going on. I'm sure it's still happening. When you think about, I know it's not the same thing, but there's surveillance happening really through our digital stuff, through social media, through our phones and our laptops, through Facebook and all these things. Surveillance is really part of our everyday lives that we don't really believe we have privacy anymore, at least not when we're on our phones or on our computers. The whole concept of privacy is changing. And I really think this film is a warning. It's a warning about what happens when you give unfettered power to a government and let them invade the lives of people and spy on them and bug them and put them under surveillance without any kind of accountability, without any kind of oversight. And that has really become more of an issue in the last few years. And yet it's still happening. Like, nothing's really changing. And so this film, I think, will always be relevant for that reason. As we grapple with these new technologies, when we look at how politics and governments are changing and how they are becoming more extreme, they are more and more being run by people who are not really smart, who are not capable of doing it, that they're just people who want power and they don't care how they get it. Because that's how I see Trump. I see him almost as like a Hemp character of someone who's just hungry for power. And that's all he wants. And he just treats people however. It doesn't matter. He just wants power. And people are just there for him to exploit and manipulate and do whatever he wants to. I see Trump and Hemp almost as like the same in a lot of ways, like really terrible, terrible people, hungry for power. And so there's so much to this film. Like watching it 12 years later, some of it still is very powerful, like the themes of surveillance, the themes of how people react when they're under a very repressive government. Do you resist? Do you fall apart? Do you just try to survive and numb yourself? What do people do? And you're going to get numerous and varied reactions to that. And can art change people? That's a big question. I think we're living in a world where I don't know. Like, I don't know. The world has changed so much in 12 years. But in this film, art does have a great deal of power. When Wiesler hears Sonata for a Good Man. And of course it ends with Dreyman finding out about Wiesler, finding out that this man protected him, that he was spying on him, but he was not telling the authorities that he wrote the essay, and stuff like that. And Dreyman writes a book called Sonata for a Good Man, and he dedicates it to Wiesler. And so it's like full circle in a lot of ways. It all comes full circle in that way. So what does it mean to be a good person when you're in circumstances that don't really allow you to be good, that only create mistrust and betrayal, and people are just trying to survive and look out for themselves? How do you survive that kind of environment? It's scary. I think that something like the GDR in East Germany could absolutely happen again. That maybe it is happening in other parts of the world. But especially with the unfettered power of like state surveillance that's happening here, especially in the United States, with the NSA and stuff like that, it could absolutely happen again. I think. I really do think it's a real danger that something like the GDR could happen again, where you have that kind of surveillance apparatus. You have people informing against each other, and that's always possible, I think. And we have to be aware of the dangers of surveillance, I think. But I don't know. I think those warnings are really going unheeded in our society, unfortunately. But this film, I think it really holds up because of that, because of all the stuff that's going on in the film. And that's why I think it made such an impact on me, sitting in the theater watching it. And did I mention, I didn't mention that, did I mention that Wiesler, he took the typewriter out of the secret hiding place. I didn't mention that. I'm sorry. And so when the Stasi go to open that hiding place, the typewriter's not there. So Dreyman is never prosecuted with anything because there's no evidence against him. Because before the Stasi got there, Wiesler got there. He got there first, and he took the typewriter out. But Christa-Maria didn't know that. They just see the hiding place being opened. And then that's when she runs out and she gets hit by the car. And so, again, only Christa-Maria suffers. Like, Dreyman's never prosecuted. Nothing ever happens to him. But then Christa-Maria's dead. Like, I feel like all the suffering and stuff was put on her as a female character. And looking back on that really bothers me. I wish she had not been sort of the sacrifice. She was almost like the sacrificial lamb, and all of her pain seems to be almost metaphorical or symbolic in some way. And I think that sort of bothers me, to add and heap up all that tragedy and suffering and pain onto the one female character. While the men, they're doing just fine. Dreyman goes on, Hemp's fine, Hemp's out. I don't think he was ever prosecuted. Wiesla is suffering a bit. He's like a mail carrier, and he gets demoted after he takes the typewriter. And he's steaming letters open when the Berlin Wall falls. So he definitely got demoted for what he did in protecting Dreyman. And of course his act is, I guess it's a moment of self-sacrifice. It's this moment at which you realize that Wiesla has really changed, that he's willing to protect these people that he doesn't even know. And it's a powerful moment, like it really is. And I remember when I saw the film in the theater, it's so quick when Wiesla is leaving with the typewriter that you don't even see it. Like, you barely see it. And it wasn't until I got the DVD of the film later on and that I saw that I could like slow it down, or I could I think I remember freeze framing it. And I saw the typewriter, and so now I fully understood the film, because when I saw it the first time at the theater, I don't think I understood what had happened, because I didn't see Wiesla with the typewriter, because it was so quick. But he does do that act of sacrifice. He sacrifices his career. He puts all of that on the line to protect Dreyman and Christa-Maria. Of course, it doesn't save Christa-Maria, and she's so full of shame for what she's done. And I guess she knows that it can never be the same between her and Dreyman, that she's really heartbroken by it and runs out and does that. But I hated that she is the only one that dies. Of course the woman is killed, right? Of course the woman dies. Yeah, I didn't like that aspect, and it really bothers me now. And I still grapple with the way Wiesla is represented, of how he is such a big part of the film, and his life is such a big part of it. And I wonder if the humanization and making him so sympathetic, if that almost, overlooks or sort of minimizes the real damage that he did as a Stasi agent. So those are just some of the things that I think I'm left with personally to think about after doing this review and thinking and talking about the film. Those are just a few things that stick with me, I think. But I'm glad I talked about this film, and it was just really important to me after my father died and going to that theater. And it was one of those films that it just stayed with me, and it's haunted me for 12 years, that film. I've watched it multiple times. I bought the DVD. It's just one of those films that I really like, and I'm not going to say it's a perfect film. I have issues with the way Christa-Maria is treated in the film. I have issues, I think, with the representation of Wiesla, and sometimes in a way it almost ends too perfectly, that everything is wrapped up in a bow at the end, right? That Dreyman writes the book and dedicates it to Wiesla, and there's just it feels too perfect at times, right? But it is a beautifully written film, I think. And I guess what I loved so much about it when I was younger was the way that it came together so perfectly, that there was like a poetry about it, such a poetic aspect of the film, of how A led to B and B led to C, and it just seemed like perfectly paced and perfectly plotted. And the colors of the film are very haunting as well, because you won't see another film with that kind of color palette. For me personally, he used beiges and greens and browns, and it has this whole color palette to it that is very evocative, I think, and that he was trying to capture some of sort of the bleakness of the GDR, of living under that. It reminded me a bit of some of Krzysztof Kieślowski's films about Poland in, I think, the 70s and 80s, like maybe Camera Buff, but also Decalogue. And those films in Decalogue have a very muted color palette. It's like grays and that sort of thing, and there's like a bleakness about these characters' lives. And that comes through in the color palette. And something similar, I think, is happening with the lives of others. And there's just something about those colors. It transports you into the world of the film, and it just makes the film stand out in some way. And it just sticks in your mind, this world that von Donnersmarck created, and these characters that he created, and all of it is so compelling and just makes you think about so many things, whether it's surveillance or what it means to resist a repressive government, or the power of art to possibly change and transform people, or thinking about the very petty men and terrible men who always end up in power somehow. Those men will always find a way to be powerful and to control other people's lives. It's depressing to even think about. So there's so much to this film, and I'm glad I talked about it, and I will stop here. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, keep watching great films. Bye for now.